Welcome back to Leaders of Healthcare. I'm your host, Shreya Jvalia. And before we transition to the interview portion, I'd like to just give some quick context. In this interview, we're featuring Derek Fetzer, a personal mentor of mine for over 20 years. And to give you a little bit about Derek's background, currently he is the Director of Market Research at Regeneron Pharmaceuticals, focusing on eye care therapies. And prior to this, and this is where I met Derek, was at Johnson & Johnson, specifically the pharmaceutical arm of Johnson & Johnson called Janssen Pharmaceuticals. And there, he's done a lot of notable work throughout his career. He's been a professor of business at Rutgers Business School. He's spoken at large industry conferences. But specifically why I wanted to have him on the podcast was he started a very interesting startup within J&J that ran for over 6 years and gained multiple awards. But let me explain a little bit about it. So it was called Caring Crowd. And what it essentially was a crowd sharing platform for grassroots public health initiatives. So imagine that someone in Africa wants to bring a water well. They're able to publish this project on Caring Crowd. The project goes through an advisory board of public health seasoned professionals. And after the approval, the project gets posted on the J&J Caring Crowd platform. Now, why this was so innovative was he was able to merge for-profit interests, which J&J is a for-profit company, with nonprofit interests, which in this case was building a water well. What he was able to do was ensure that every single donation that happened on the platform, J&J would match dollar for dollar, if not more in certain instances. And this was able to create exponential value, both for J&J's nonprofit arm, but also for some of these grassroots public health initiatives. It was really an incredible feat. I believe the platform raised over $1 million on the site itself. In addition, created a lot of esteem for J&J. They got lots of earned media through their public health advisors. And I think that culminated in winning a People's Choice Award in healthcare at South by Southwest. So incredible work. And I think it really showcases a lot of how we can be creative in healthcare, but also we can be entrepreneurs where we can work in large organizations, but then still bring our unique value and impact and build almost a startup inside a larger company. Lots of things to learn from in Derek's interview. So let's transition over and I hope you like it.
Into today's show, we'll be talking with Derek Fetzer, who has successfully been an entrepreneur. While working at Johnson & Johnson, one of the largest companies in the world, he was able to drive innovation within the organization while working as an employee. He started a very amazing platform, which we'll talk about today, called Caring Crowd, which is for public health, while working at J&J. So today, we'll talk about entrepreneurship and how you can really be driving innovation while working at a company. So without further ado, let me welcome my guest, Derek Fetzer. Thank you for coming onto the show. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Shreya. Pleasure to be here.
Yes. So Derek, please tell us, what in your eyes is an entrepreneur?
So entrepreneurship is opposed to entrepreneurship, and everyone's familiar with that. Entrepreneurship is really kind of the same, but applying it within a large company. And sometimes what happens is within large companies, they kind of function as juggernauts, right? They have a very determined direction, and it's hard to move in new directions, right? So the entrepreneur comes in and is basically laying the groundwork in terms of, okay, let's, there's some other possibilities and, something innovative that we can run with. There's a lot of forces within a company to keep things, obviously it's important to keep things in a cogent direction, but they can run amok as well, right? So you also want to be able to foster innovation, and very few companies have a very, I would say, designated pathway for innovation to take place. Usually when we're talking about innovation, companies are familiar with product or some service innovation, but if it diverges a lot from what they were doing, then they have problems. So for example, just a quick example, right? That Kodak, for example, at one point, they actually had in-house digital photography and they just ignored it, right? That's a case. Another famous case would be Blockbuster and Netflix, right? For years, Netflix was taking off. Blockbuster couldn't change their course, right? So, that's what we're talking about with, and of course, those two examples are larger scale examples, but it happens also in smaller, day-to-day operations and just trying to change something. Most people within large organizations are familiar with how much effort it takes to even make small changes. So that's entrepreneurship.
I love that. And entrepreneurship, and I love that example, and actually even more context for the audience about Derek. He actually has won 2 awards of many, but number 1, your Caring Crowd platform won the 2017 South by Southwest People's Choice Award, so it was a phenomenal platform. And I think just most recently, just last year, you won the HTLH Corporate Innovation Award. So you obviously know what innovation is, and especially how to drive it in a large organization. So I guess maybe let me get your perspective, if you can maybe share a little bit more about the Caring Crowd platform, what it was, what inspired you to make it, and how did you actually make it happen? Because working in a large organization, it's so easy to just do your day-to-day job.
Right.
I know, while also working at J&J, that's how we met. That was my day-to-day. But it was hard for me to get out of that and think, how do I innovate within the company?
Right.
So I feel like there's a lot of gems there. So I would love any context you could share.
Sure. So one of the things that I did when I was working within that new business unit back at J&J was just really, first of all, really understanding what the organization was about and what they were trying to aspire. What were they aspiring for, right? And in that moment, it was a new business unit. They were trying to achieve goals in public health, and really understanding what does that mean, right? And here it's important because if you start just going and talking to people and getting their pain points, many times what they want you to do is the parts of their job that's less attractive to them, right? So you have to listen to the pain, not their solution, right? And then after you have a good sense of what are the objectives of the organization, what's the strategy, or what strategies are they employing, and then also understanding what are the pain points, right? And then finally, with the other co-founder, John Brennick, and myself, we did basically an audit of what was going on within the business unit in terms of what are the pain points, what are they trying to aspire, and then we went through lots of different possible solutions until we came across crowdfunding, which we realized, something. This addresses pain points. This connects with the strategy of the organization. And at that point, we had conversations. And again, this was a process that took several months, right? Where we're talking to select people within the organization as a sounding board. And what's important here, and this is what Dr. Patty Miller, he coined the term stealth innovation. Because if you show too much too fast, you basically get the organizations are generally exposed to way too many ideas, and so automatically things shut down. But if you have these casual conversations with the right person, or just a few people at the very beginning, say, I have this crazy idea. Let me talk to you about it. Let's have that conversation. And then as the excitement builds, well, what would it take to make this work? And it's interesting because after a while, after several months, now we had a better articulated, we did our homework, but we have a better articulated version of this where we could go to higher level executives and propose the idea, right? And so that was basically the pathway, right? But there is no designated pathway, and that's what the entrepreneur tries to figure out is how do I work with this system to get to that decision point? So it comes with a knowledge of the organization, right? Its strategy, its purpose, and where's the energy? And that's a very important part is where's the energy of the organization? And then there's other key important stakeholders too, like people in legal or regulatory. And a lot of people look at those part of the organizations and say that's where ideas go to die, right? They get killed there. And that was not my experience in this case, right? Where I went to them and said, this is the naked idea. This is the crazy idea. Wouldn't it be great if we could do this? And there was a lot of energy there, a lot of good vibe where they said, yeah, something, in order to make that work, this is what has to happen. And then but the idea was involving them early in the design of it, inspired on on a good idea, right? And I think that's what pulled it forward.
And could you share a little bit more for the context of what is Caring Crowd and what has it accomplished, I think?
So Caring Crowd was a crowdfunding platform for global public health, much in the lines of GoFundMe or Kickstarter, right? And the idea is that there were many nonprofits around the world seeking funding. And this, there were a number of mechanics that were favorable for crowdfunding to allow those to happen, right? And so at the end of the day, what happened was more than 600 projects got funded around the world, touching at least 1.5 million people. So it did a lot of good in the time it was up and running. I think it lasted around 7 years.
Yeah.
And I think something around the order of magnitude of $3 to $4 million in total went to these public health projects. Now, bear in mind, a public health project one that comes to mind is a project for $30,000 in Colombia that helped out basically 20,000 children get fresh water, right? They were drinking runoff water from mining, from mining communities, and they were getting sick because of that. So a little bit of money in these underserved communities around the world did a huge amount of good.
I remember the biggest thing during my time and our time together with Caring Crowd was it was so focused on these grassroots projects that theoretically could have been overlooked had it not been for your platform. Right. And I think that's really why I want to inspire others to seek entrepreneurship, if it's not entrepreneurship, because there's so much innovation to be had, but at the end of the day, there's impact that could be had as well. I remember because of your platform, I was able to, and I actually had a team of individuals who helped me as well. We ran 2 public health projects. One was for human trafficking globally, and helping save and do rescue missions. And another one was for public health education in America. Right. Because certain parts of America just don't have public health education that could literally, teach how people have, basic hygiene, and preventative techniques to improve their overall health. So those were the 2 projects we ran. But I think the other piece I want to go back into is how you brought everyone into this idea of crowdfunding. And I think that's something where it can easily be overlooked how in a large organization like a Johnson & Johnson, where you have to get everyone's buy-in to actually do innovation. I don't know if you can talk more about that, because that's a big piece of the puzzle, I think.
It is. And what I learned early on is that you have to seek the converted. Don't waste your time trying to convert people. If it's taking more than 2 minutes and they're not getting it, just walk away, move on, and find it. That's my rule of thumb on all of this, right? That is, you start off with the people you trust to have that candid conversation, and you build up, and then you keep talking to the next level of trust, you might say, right? So some people just won't get it. And the same might be true for me in other realms where I just don't get it until I see it. But that's what would happen, right? Some people just didn't get it until it was up and running and live, right? Until they actually see it working, they just don't get it. And that's fine, right? But other people would get excited because within 30 seconds or 2 minutes of the concept, they're excited because they see the possibilities. And with that person, then it becomes, hey, I want to be a part of that, and how can you help? And that's how the energy grows. But I think the big thing is, if you're trying too hard to convert the person or enroll them into your vision, it's not really worth it. And if nobody's enrolled in your vision, then question your vision. Maybe it's time to move on to something else.
Well, I think that brings up a good point, right? Within entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship, and maybe it dives more into the premise of this podcast, which is the self-management piece, because I think everyone who is ambitious has their own ideas, maybe for their own career, maybe for a business, but there's an element of self-doubt that does come along. And also the act of balancing everything else, right? You are happily married, you have children, and you've been able to do all this innovation throughout your life. Can you share a little bit more about your personal philosophy? Like, what did you do in those times of self-doubt? Because I'm sure as you were building Caring Crowd, I'm sure many people said, no, this won't work. What did you do in those instances?
Well, I think that's kind of the benefit of doing the intrapreneurship. Because it's not you're not you don't have the existential issue as if you're an entrepreneur, right? If the business fails, right, what am I going to do? Whereas in the entrepreneur, it's you are on a you do rely on the infrastructure of the large company, right? And so you don't have that sense of risk. It's more a sense of embarrassment if you fail, right? That first month until the first project got funded on Caring Crowd, John and I, we were just really I mean, there was a lot of apprehension because we were thinking, oh my gosh, if this doesn't work, it's going to be horribly embarrassing for us, right? But I think it was the promise of that vision, right? It was like, oh, if this works, oh my gosh, the good it could do, right? The service it could do, the needs it could fill, right? So that's what kind of pushes you forward, right? But that vision. But I think it's also really. I read a book by Maxwell years ago that really helped me kind of digest all of this, called Failing Forward. And it really just kind of, it really put failure in its own perspective, right? And that is, hey, you really have to get comfortable with failing. That's what it is. You can't guarantee success, and you just have to get comfortable with failing. Caring Crowd, it was successful, but it was launched in the first place because there were 10 failures trying to, prior to that, obviously don't get published or talked about, but that came about based on, having witnessed many other failures. So then finally, when the idea of this came about, we realized, oh, this fits all the parameters, right? This can work because it's not going to run into the same issues the 10 prior projects ran into, right? Does that answer your question?
It does, and I think I love the concept of failing forward.
Yeah.
I haven't heard it phrased exactly like that, but I think it's such a good point, right? So maybe we segue a little bit into market research and customer insights, because I think obviously you're a director of market research now for Regeneron. You've worked at the largest companies in the world doing market research. You also teach it at business schools. So I wonder if you can give for our audience concepts of market research, best practices in market research, and maybe take us from the top down. Maybe what is market research for the person who doesn't even know?
Yeah. So why do market research, right? I mean, you would think that the needs are very explicit, and people, you would just, there's a need for this, and go do it, right? Now, the issue with that is that people aren't actually very good at articulating their needs, or they can't relate to a better state, right? That there could be a better way of doing things, or they just don't believe it, right? And so the market research goes in, and we're trying to, we rely on psychology, we rely on behavioral science, we rely on mathematics, statistics. I mean, we rely on a lot of different tools to determine, is there a need, right? And can it be filled? And this is particularly important, say, and what are the obstacles for actually, in case of pharmaceuticals or health, getting treatment, right? A great success story, for example, is Noom, Noom, where they recognize weight loss is more than education. It's really about behavior, and you can't bludgeon people with education until they finally, lose weight, submit and lose weight, right? There's a lot of behavioral issues going on, right? Is there a fundamental belief that you can't lose the weight, right? And if that's the case, so think of that from the market research point of view. It's what's actually stopping you from getting treatment, right? What's stopping you from reaching the better state, right? So why do the market research is to understand those things, right? So, one thing is, for example, to say, hey, I'll feel better, if I buy a Nike shoe, that's an expression of who I am, right? That's one thing. Another thing is, hey, I'm diabetic and I need this medication, right? And I don't want to recognize that I'm a diabetic, right? So now, if that's the case, what is the role of marketing for a person that's really having difficulty, right, in recognizing their condition and treatment, right? So this is the role of market research.
I think it gives great context because everything should start with market research, but I feel like it's one area of business where it's just under talked about, in my personal opinion. Everyone wants to jump into marketing. Everyone wants to say, oh, we're going to make this, we're going to make this. But they don't take actually a step back to understand what does the research say? What does the audience actually want? So, Derek, maybe since it's your area of expertise, and I think many people can learn from this, obviously it won't be an exact crash course. This is a podcast at the end of the day. But I would love to understand from your perspective, maybe we keep it in the light of pharmaceutical clinical research, or market research, excuse me. How do you set up a market research study? Where do you start? Let's say someone says, hey,
so there's two, I'll answer in two parts, right? So first of all, with my students at Rutgers, I have them go through from the whole process, right? That is, they come up with a business question, and in many cases they think they already know the answer, and I think that's part of the education here is, they come up with a business question, they think they know the answer, and then they go and conduct some market research, that is qualitative interviews. And then with that, they begin to realize, oh, whoa, people are talking about things I had never really ever considered, right? And then only then do they actually start to amplify their minds, and they realize there's a lot out there, and there's a lot of issues I haven't considered. There's a lot of different ways of thinking about this that I hadn't considered. And so at that point, once you feel that you've spoken in a very qualitative sense, right? With the market or the customers or stakeholders, then you go into a quantitative exercise and you begin to figure out what are the sizes of these different aspects of the market, right, or the issues. So, you were asking about what does this look like start to finish, right? So, I mean, very generally speaking, you start off with a business question. You do some secondary analysis. That is, you go in and you start, you do your Google searches, you read books, right? You go to Amazon, download some books, things like that. So you're a little bit more educated. Now after that, you go and start having the conversations with stakeholders, so qualitative interviews where you can have these very rich discussions, very much like the one we're having right now, right? Then you synthesize that type of input, and then you say, okay, if I have the appetite to go into a quantitative setting, right? Now I develop, I want to get respondents of hundreds, possibly thousands of respondents, and get an idea of, okay, what are the sizes of these issues, markets, demographics, et cetera, that are relevant to my business question, right? And then after all of this, then you come down and you sit down, okay, what are the recommendations that come out of all of this after going through basically 3 steps, right? Does that answer you? I hope
it absolutely answers my question. Now, I want to ask a little bit more poignant question, and obviously feel free to share as much as you feel comfortable, but you've done market research for decades at this point. Now, you've seen many, let's say theoretically, you've hired many agencies to do market research for your organization or for your project. What have you seen as the biggest failures? Where is it that you're saying, here's the gap? This agency, we paid them millions of dollars to do this research, but you know what? They kind of missed the whole mark, because I'm sure they know the study design. They tried to conduct interviews. They tried to do the quant analysis. They probably tried to give you some sort of output that was reasonable. But I'm sure many times you're like, you know what, this agency missed the mark. Is there anything that maybe we could learn from that to say, anytime?
I don't think it's so much as failing from the market research point of view. I think it's sometimes, I think it's that the market research wasn't focused enough. Okay, that is, it tended to be kind of a boil the ocean, right? Like, tell me about the market without it becoming what is the marketing decision actually, right? So many times I think it becomes a fishing expedition instead of say a sniper shot. Right, and that's or a safari, right? Something where it's focused and tangible, right? So there's those issues. Then there's an issue of, it comes into the issue of entrepreneurship. It actually loops back, because from the market research, you actually might come up with some ideas of how to change the course. Now the question is there the organizational will to actually implement it or do it, right?
Okay.
Because you're basically saying to a lot of people, oh, okay, you're going to have to change the way you think, you're going to have to change your activities, we're going to have to engage in a new way, right? And for a lot of people, that's very frightening. So there's a lot going on.
And in when you teach your students, right, how do you encourage them to stay focused on the market research? Is there, and when you're teaching in general, is there certain principles that, because you're basically teaching fresh master students, hey, here's what market research in the pharmaceutical world looks like. How do you actually bring them with you on that experience journey, right? Because you're bringing all these decades of experience. Right. You're going to teach them the general design, but how do you kind of nudge them to say, here's how you actually do it right?
So, allow them to fail.
Okay. Got it.
Okay, so the students start off with their own projects. They decide the subject, they decide their business question, right? And they basically conduct that whole process, right? That is secondary, qualitative, and quantitative. They conduct all of that. And as they're going, I bite my tongue many times, like, you might want to think about this, but it's better for them to just experiment it all. It's a safe setting. So to make that safe, I'm just looking at them on terms of how much are they learning? How much are they engaged in the process, right? And how much let's call it intellectual honesty did they have along the way, right? That is where they say, where I'm impressed is when the students can say something like, wow, it's completely different from what I thought it was, right? I had an idea of what the answer was, and I was just kind of doing this to kind of check off, and then they realize, oh, whoa, there's a lot more there than I ever imagined, right? And so when the students experiment that, they see that, right? When they experience that, that's when they get excited, and they're like, oh, wow, I can't wait to get to the end of this to see how it actually pans out, So that's...
So there's art and science to it, and the experimentation of it as well. So Derek, I would love to wrap up the podcast because I want to keep it actionable for our listeners, and I think that they've probably gained a lot just by seeing your example and case study of how you led innovation at Johnson & Johnson and how your approach to market research is. But I guess just on a personal note, obviously you're a teacher, right? On top of this massive career that you've already amassed with all these awards and accolades, you decided to teach. So I wonder if you have any parting wisdom or a message for our audience, be it business or even just in life, that they can gather from you.
Yeah, I would highly recommend if there was any one book I'd ever recommend somebody to read, it's Man's Quest for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, right? And that is just be engaged with the purpose, right? And just realize what your purpose is, right? And there's going to be failure along the way, and that'll be okay as long as it's moving in the direction of your purpose, right? That's
And before we wrap up, what is, if you feel comfortable sharing your purpose, but how did you find your purpose anyway?
Something, it's just failing along the way, right? It's just, you're working out. So when I was 18 or 16 or whatever, I wanted to be an astronaut. Never would I ever guessed that I was going to be in pharmaceutical market research, right? And so it's just along the way, you're just realizing, hey, I like this, I enjoy this, and I ended up here quite by accident, but very much enjoyed it, right? But the idea is to keep moving forward, right? You don't have unlimited possibilities, right? But just, you work with what you have, make your best decision, be happy with that, keep moving forward.